Thank you for joining us. My name is Chris Shields. I head up product marketing here at Gurucul. I am joined by Randeep Gill, Senior Solution Architect with over 20 years of experience in the cybersecurity industry, including working in a SOC for a global service provider. A few housekeeping notes before we jump in. Please, I encourage everyone to ask questions during the demo. We will get to them live at the end. You will get a link to this recording, usually within 24 to 48 hours for future reference in a thank you email. And lastly, sometimes BrightTalk defaults to 480p. So if you feel like you're having resolution issues, at the bottom, you should be able to adjust the resolution to 1080p. So SIEMs have gotten a bad rap over the years with declining detections, skyrocketing costs, lack of control over your data. It's certainly understandable. In today's Democast, we will cover how REVEAL security analytics platform empowers you to cut through the noise, false positives, to really help uncover the true threats. And so with that, I will turn it over to Rand to show us how we do that.
Thank you very much, Chris. I'm just about to share my screen.
Great.
Wonderful. I love it when tech works. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining us on this presentation to see how we can understand the noise and thus reduce the noise. But let's all be honest, this all comes down to a conversation around cost. The cost of how we reduce the risk, but essentially also how we improve overall operational efficiency. And the first part on the fundamental part of cost also includes reducing those log volumes and understanding those log volumes better. And really, when we look at those, we want to understand, well, hey, what is useful to us from a security operations perspective, but also the data we want to store as well for more long term. So the Gurucul REVEAL AI platform is one single data fabric. We can bring the logs straight in or from any log source from any vendor into the central data fabric via our data optimizer, which you can see here on the screen here. Now, the essence of Gurucul's data optimizer is to really filter out the noise. And that's the first thing. I always say, it's garbage in, garbage out. If we do not have the right logs, if we're just storing noise, we're going to get that output as well when we look at detection and when we're threat hunting.
Hey, Randeep. Mm-hmm. I think I may have inadvertently ended your share.
Okay, I'll reshare again.
Would you mind resharing?
Hey, you want all the attention.
Yeah, I'm an attention seeker. Yeah. Okay. All right. Thank you. Sorry about that.
Okay, but hopefully everyone can see the screen again. So as mentioned, we're one single data fabric, and in essence, Gurucul's data optimizer is the first place where we collect all log sources from any vendor via various means, whether this be through API, through a flat file, through syslog, whatever the means it is, we collect it in one single central place. Now, the essence of data optimizer is to first reduce that noise. We really need to clean up collection, and that's really been a problem from every customer and many different vendors for many years. So the dashboard here essentially shows some very basic but very poignant stats. On the left-hand side, the volume that I'm collecting from the various log sources and the data that's been optimized. Now, these particular dashboards, whatever I use today and show you in the demonstration today, are totally customizable. They're accessible by single sign-on, depending on the type of role that you have. So perhaps if you're a security engineer or an architect, this is the kind of information you want to see, because you're looking at the investments that you've made within your organization, and you want to improve the efficacy of those investments and help the security analysts do their job better. So in essence, any of these widgets are clickable, and I'll click on a few just to prove the point. We can expand the view to see what's been filtered, go by date and time if we really want to here, and start an investigation here. Notice the Gurucul REVEAL AI platform by design is designed to be easy and intuitive to use. Now, just from a few clicks, I've not only got to the information quicker, but I've also pre-populated a query. Perhaps I'm learning the search query language from scratch, and I can start to understand the query from here. Let's go back to the main dashboard. Now, We also want to understand, well, okay, what is Gurucul collecting? Why is it collecting it? Where is it putting the rest of my data? Because even before I start to do some threat hunting and see what alerts and what events we have, I want to understand those particular situations. Why? Because there might be some regulatory compliance that I need to work towards to keep data for X number of months, perhaps a year, and while we threat hunt on the main data. This is totally viewable through the pipeline. As you can see, every part of the platform is completely transparent to the security engineer architect. So in which case, if we pick on, let's say, Windows logs, sys logs that we're using here, we can start to see how the pipeline is built up. And I say this candidly, you can build custom pipelines by yourself just by 4 or 5 steps within the wizard here. There are pre-built pipelines already for all the log sources and the vendors that we support, and we can share that log source list. It's a simple case of going to the Gurucul website, typing in integrations, and you can see the latest integrations that we have. However, we built this up very quickly. So where it's coming from, for example, from an API or syslog source, the type of log source it is. This could be a particular vendor. It could even be a custom log source, perhaps a custom database or application that you have within your environment that you want to start to see activity or behavior on. Now, out of the box, we have hundreds of parsers. These are filtering out events for those log source types. For example, event IDs, file names, usernames, etc., etc. This is the content we're going to now forward into the security analytics part of our platform, again, emphasizing this as a single data fabric. However, you might say, well, hey, what events have you pulled from a particular log source? This is the default parser. My team can customize this parser here and preview the results in real time. I can also see the mappings from that particular parser or event. So, for example, logon IDs, usernames, date, timestamps, etc., and how they're being normalized into the Gurucul language, as we say. However, we also have the ability to customize further. We do not have to follow a particular format of normalization, perhaps by Gurucul. Maybe you have a particular format that you use. Maybe, for example, you call IP address IP underscore address, or you want to add a function to say, hey, this particular log source checks against threat intel. I really want to have a lookup field in here to check against threat intel because this is what this particular log source does. So totally customizable and totally transparent. You can also set notifications. Maybe the log source has failed. That's quite important for most SOCs as well. And this is where the reroute happens. So any other data can be stored externally to an external SIEM, S3 buckets, the log collection source of your choice. So very important to say, well, we're taking events that are prescriptive to security-based outcomes. However, we can store the rest away. One point to make here, until we start doing some threat hunting on this information, is to say, well, hey, I've got the ability to use Gurucul's federated search to search across all logs across all time. And this is very powerful for us to say within the single UI, I can say, well, okay, I want to search for certain artifacts, not just for the 30 days I'm storing in hot, but also from the log store that I've stored away over the last 9, 10, 12 months as well. So single UI to search across there. And just to show you, just to prove the point, we have a few log sources or external log collection sources configured here, just to labor that point. Now, the subject of this particular democast was to emphasize on noise. So we've understood how Gurucul can use Data Optimizer to very effectively reduce the noise from ingest, because we want to reduce that garbage in and become very prescriptive on what we bring into our security analytics platform. Within the same UI, again, through single sign-on, I can now access my dashboard, which is focused on events and alerts, and also the dashboard on risk if I so see it. Now, again, this is all customizable, but there's some key points I want to mention here. We can bring in alerts from any security product that are native to that particular solution and that product, and that might be important to you. Perhaps there's a premise for you to look after endpoint alerts or alerts within a particular cloud environments. We can also bring in and understand singular alerts, perhaps that have been created manually from saved searches, also known as correlation rules. And these can all be stored and reviewed here. So perhaps your SOC today is just reviewing certain types of alerts, maybe within your ticketing system, maybe within another case management system, or maybe that's the responsibility of an individual to say, well, hey, I want to only look at EDR alerts today, and that's the actions I take. That's totally doable within the alerts portion or the instance portion of Gurucul's REVEAL AI. However, we use machine learning to then look at risk or risk built over time. And by doing that, we have to understand normal first. By bringing all these log sources in, we start to correlate the events from any user or asset or any other entity, for example, and start to look at those deviations from the norm. And those deviations could include security alerts. They could include individual behavior anomalies based on, say, EDR traffic. But we also use machine learning AI to bubble up risk that could be indicative of perhaps, let's say, for example, insider threat. Perhaps we also amalgamate threat intelligence alerts. By design, we have our own threat intel included within the platform, and that comes with any platform, whether we're sitting on premise, whether we're sitting in the cloud, or sitting in your private cloud. It does not matter. There is feature parity throughout. You can also bring in custom log in threat intels if you so wish, and ingest those as part of your detection mechanism. I will talk about auto response at the end because it's certainly relevant, but I want to also emphasize how we understand that noise. We can build a dashboard based upon that risk. Notice the incidents or cases based on risk are fundamentally lower. And this is where you can leverage machine learning to then start your day. And often I say to Chris, I say, hey, when I log into the Gurucul REVEAL AI platform, I grab my cup of coffee in the morning. Where do I start? And the first place you can start is in the instance, because there's been enough anomalous activity for a user or any type of entity to then to be prioritized as specifically risky for my organization. So you see some big red risk scores, and anything that's 90 or above is created into a case. And by the way, I will finish off with some of the customization features, because you can customize anything, any part of the platform, including the risk threshold and the detections. I'll touch on some of the dashboard widgets I have here. I'm looking at enterprise alerts or cloud-based alerts here, based on the particular model anomalies. Perhaps I've got a simple watch list on assets or users. That might be useful to me. Maybe I have a watch list on service accounts or critical assets, because I know there are assets in my environment that have not been patched. They're vulnerable. They have CVEs. Maybe I'm bringing in data from vulnerability assessment tools and saying, well, hey, I want to watch these machines and watch their behavior. Perhaps there's a geolocation interest, activity and traffic from different locations. And by the way, Gurucul also has a traffic analyzer where we can look at network traffic patterns and deviations from that activity, then bubble risk by geolocation, IP, and source as well. And perhaps I even want to look at starting investigations through MITRE TTPs. Now, I read a great article which talked about different ransomware families and the TTPs they generally generate. So perhaps an organization says, well, hey, I want to understand and look into what execution type activity has happened within my organization and start my investigation here. So going back to the premise of this conversation, we can immediately reduce the noise from individual alerts, number one, to risk-based incidents. And this becomes very powerful when we start to do investigations. So let's pick one, for example, and users can always do anomalous things, but how about assets and machines and IoT devices? They can often be very stagnant and static, but when there's a deviation from that norm, I really want to understand why. So let's pick on this server here. Now, as an analyst, when I'm doing an investigation, I really want to ask key questions very, very quickly without having to pivot to different dashboards. May it be just hovering over some of these anomalies and saying, well, hey, what does this anomaly mean? And I'll show you as we scroll down. Or even at the basic thing, I might say, well, hey, I don't really know what SQL Server 9110 is. Have we got any more context information? And the answer is yes. By design, Gurucul can ingest context from not only the classic ADs, Azure ADs, and CMDBs, but also custom context tables and databases where we can enrich that particular event or log a lot further to see a lot more evidence within my investigation. So a very quick view there. We can also pivot back because we're not limited by time. We can use Gurucul REVEAL AI advanced analytics to look back in time to say, well, hey, I'm looking on today's activity, but has anything happened which is an emerging threat over time? So as I scroll down, what you're seeing here is some of the machine learning models which have triggered against this particular asset. Now, as you can see, we can also ingest events from Sysmon, not necessarily relying on EDR activity, although we take in events from all EDR solutions, and we start to build that anomalous activity. So maybe there's a flavor to review endpoint activity and say, well, hey, what's important to me? And then start to look at those deviations. But one thing in the middle here, which is key to mention, is everything we do is prescriptive from a security perspective, but also the fact that we're actually mapping everything to MITRE. Every detection we see is mapped to MITRE. So going back to my initial conversation on the dashboard, we can start to look at how we leverage detections against MITRE or activity within my organization. And perhaps at the end of it, your SOC manager, SOC lead says, well, hey, let's have a review of the last month's activity on particular TTPs. What do we need to look at? What's important to us? How do we improve the efficacy of our log sources back to Data Optimizer to make these detections even better? So the second question I usually ask is, well, great, Gurucul has created an anomalous activity for this asset. What does this mean to me? If I expand any of these detections, it gives me some level of information or historical view, depending on what it is. In this case, a rare process has executed. It's giving me the command line information. This is often, again, gathered from Sysmon or EDR tools or any other tool which can give us this insight. It can also give you the path as well. And in this case, luckily, we've got a username. At this point, I don't know what it is. Any point in time, I can respond. And this is the speed of how we, number one, reduce the noise and the capability of actually responding based on that reduction in noise. I can pivot and assign a task. I can add comments. And by the way, we have bidirectional integrations with external ticketing systems such as BMC Remedy, ServiceNow. So if your single pane of glass is to start in perhaps ServiceNow, we can start the investigation there, and we have the ability to run playbooks back and forth to update those tickets if we so wish. However, maybe we want to go into the Investigate tab because I'm curious as to how this activity has occurred. And expanding on these views, Gurucul already highlights the key events from that particular activity or that detection, which is nice for us. We're not limited by it, but for, let's say, perhaps a tier one analyst, this is great because these are interesting things that I might want to look at. I can also click on the raw message here and go straight to the full raw message if I so wish. At this point, I can also see the queries built up, and I might say, okay, this is really useful. I want to make this more actionable. I can save it as a search, which is great. A lot of threat hunters do that because they might want to come back to it. I can also save it as a safe search and alert upon it, just like a correlation rule, well, pretty much the same as a correlation rule. So we can take proactive steps just from a threat hunt on what we see here. And we also have the search, which is created for us here, but I'm not having to remember it. Now, maybe I want to expand my search. And I say, well, okay, I found a risky asset, but that username came up. What did that user do? And from within the console, I can pivot straight to the user, him or herself, and look back at those anomalies if I so wish. I'll show you the fact that we can go back in time and start to review what that user did. Now, this is pivoted to Calvin Morgan's timeline. Again, I can hover over the summary here. On the inverse, I can see some more information about this user. I could even expand for more and get more information. And this is great for me as an analyst because I can see, well, okay, who's in his or her team? What vendors has he triggered? Which are the most noisiest vendors he's triggered, and accounts he's touched. If he or she's using multiple accounts, this could be of concern as well. But as I scroll to the bottom, and I did go back a day or two, I can see a phishing alert here from Proofpoint, which is great. We can ingest logs from Proofpoint, which says, well, he obviously received an email from a doppelganger domain here. There's an attachment which he opened, and this most probably is where the actual attack occurred from, and the source of possibly this anomalous activity. Now, this is nice because again, I have the ability to respond. So we've understood how we reduce the noise from ingest. We've understood how we reduce the noise from the alerts to risk-based aggregation and cases. But now we can quickly also use this investigation to run a playbook, and it's that easy. So just by clicking on the event, I can run from here any one of, I think, a few hundred out-of-the-box playbooks if I so wish. Now, I say out-of-the-box in kind because we have the ability to customize, and I'll show you at the end, any one of these playbooks. So perhaps my job is to, well, if I see any alert from Proofpoint, go and quarantine this email. Or quarantine this user, or ban a hash, or isolate that endpoint. Maybe that's my task. But before I show you the playbooks just to finish, we also have the capability to use the subject matter expert AI to question this particular activity as well. Because as an analyst, I'm curious to say, well, okay, you've helped me reduce the noise. Perhaps I want to ask, well, show me any other user in your environment who has also received this email. Now, I did pre-save that search in lieu of time, but I can easily ask a question and say, well, hey, show me the file name and password.zip on November 3rd, who else received this particular email? And immediately SME AI reacts and gives me a result. And I can export this and save this. I can also ask SME AI to run reports. I can also ask SME AI for advice, how to mitigate, for example, how to mitigate phishing, for example. So the ability to interact is very key here. I promise to complete with two things. Now, first and foremost is to show you some of the out-of-the-box playbooks, and just to show you some of the examples here. So within the response screen, we can see some of the playbooks here and the actions that we see here. I won't go into all of them, but just one of them for example, a very simple one, quarantining a file. Now, I ran a playbook manually, which is fine. We also have the ability to trigger on particular conditions, and this might be useful for organizations to, again, or actually start automation by automating the common, repeatable, auditable processes. And that means you might say, well, hey, Randeep, if I see something of a particular type, maybe even as basic as a CrowdStrike alert, or perhaps particular sets of TTPs, I want it automatically to do something, or simple as even create a case in ServiceNow, or perhaps even delete or quarantine the endpoint. Whatever that may be, you can also automate that activity. So in this case, I have the ability to model execution. I can say, well, hey, the trigger could be particular TTPs. I'm picking random examples here. Based on those TTPs, if I see those subsets of activity, and these are totally customizable as well as other models, I want something to happen. So that's the playbook view. Now, just to finish and to prove the point, I did say we're transparent in our detections, and this is really key to help reduce the noise. You might say, well, Randeep, do you know what? I want to have access to your detections because I want to make sure, and maybe run a report at the end of the month, end of the week, whenever it might be, to see which ones are the noisiest, which ones can I tune, which ones can I improve to, again, reduce the number of tickets my guys and girls see. And we expose all the 3,000 plus machine learning models to you. And this is the list on the left-hand side, categorized by type. Perhaps there's a certain type of regulatory requirements here, or fields that you want to see based on threat intel, but they're all exposed for your configuration. And taking one of the ones out the box, if we edit this, they're very easy to do. We have a source, whether it's a user or an entity or certain types, and that's customized. We pick a vendor again. This could be even a custom log source. And then we configure the model conditions. And this is a very basic model, but very poignant, where we start to say the types of things we want to see or alert upon and what risk score we want to give it. So for the example earlier on, maybe you want to say, well, hey, if I see certain types of activity for my executives or my service accounts or IoT devices, I want the risk to be higher. I want a case to be created. And this is another way where you can improve the efficacy of detections and also reduce the noise within your environment. And that's the end of my presentation.